No matter how well things are going for you, there will come a time when everything goes to hell. Eric Goodman was like a real-life Rambo. Even at just 10 years old, he managed to take down a 14-year-old bully. No one could figure out how he did it until his parents, after countless visits to therapists and psychiatrists, found out he had a hormonal imbalance that gave him incredible strength. His body produced a ton of adrenaline, making him almost superhuman for brief moments. The doctors gave him medication to control these episodes, and everyone agreed that he needed to channel his energy into physical training while avoiding any stressful situations. His parents made sure of it, and soon enough, Eric was training with the school wrestling team. His mom also tried various meditation exercises to help keep him calm. Somehow, it all worked, and Eric grew into a composed man. But those who knew him well still called him Rambo. His coaches would pump him up before any match, knowing that once Rambo came out, there was no stopping him. However, they were always wary of what might happen if he lost control. Eric's life went smoothly after that. He had a successful college experience, landed a good job, and married Maria. Now he was on his way home from Seattle after finalizing a deal that would significantly boost the software company's cash flow. He also had the chance to catch up with his younger sister Dorothy, who was studying at the University of Washington. They had a wonderful dinner at the Marriott and spent a few hours reminiscing. It had been years since he'd last seen her, and he cherished their time together. But now he was eager to get back to Maria, his wife of nearly 4 years. Being away from her was always tough, but it was part of the job. Eric was particularly excited about their upcoming wedding anniversary in 2 days. He had already planned a surprise weekend getaway at a local resort and ordered a beautiful emerald teardrop necklace to give her. He planned to pick it up from the jeweler the next afternoon. However, he was starting to worry because he couldn't reach her. He called her cell before boarding the flight, but it went straight to voicemail. The house phone did the same. Maybe she's out shopping with friends, he thought. He missed Maria terribly. She was petite, just under 5.5 feet, with long, wavy blonde hair, green eyes, and a sun-kissed complexion. The only issue was her intense jealousy. Maria was usually sweet, but her baseless accusations drove him crazy. He loved her too much to ever cheat, and went out of his way to show his fidelity. Yet, her jealousy had reached a point where even a business meeting with a female colleague would set her off. In frustration, he had once challenged her to hire a private investigator to prove his loyalty. He hoped that seeing the proof would finally put her fears to rest. As he thought about Maria's jealousy, he felt his heart rate climb. He tried the deep breathing exercises he'd learned, but they weren't helping. His face grew hot, and he knew he needed to calm down quickly. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small packet of pills. He took one, and after a few minutes, started to feel better. The man sitting next to him on the plane noticed and asked, "Are you okay, sir? Do you need me to call someone?" Eric shook his head. "No, but thanks for asking. It's just an old heart condition. I have medication for it." The man nodded, but kept an eye on him. Once the plane landed, Eric grabbed his luggage and headed to his car in a short-term parking lot. He tried calling Maria again, but it went to voicemail, as did the house phone. Where could she be? He muttered to himself. Starting the car, he drove home, only to find that Maria's car was missing from the garage. Eric found it strange that Maria wasn't home, especially since it was already around 8 p.m. She usually got back from work by 6:30. Maybe she decided to go out with some colleagues for a drink, he thought. It wasn't something she did often, but she usually called or texted him if she did. Plus, she knew he was coming home today and would typically be waiting to reconnect with him after his trips. He grabbed his bags and walked into the dark, empty house. After putting his things away, he headed downstairs to see if she had left a note. Finding nothing, he made himself a cup of coffee, puzzled by her silence. This was unusual. She always let him know if she was going to be out for a while. Just as he was mulling over this odd situation, his phone rang. Seeing Maria's name on the screen, he answered quickly. "Maria, where are you?" "I'm sorry, Eric. I was getting ready for tonight and didn't see your calls until a few minutes ago. What were you getting ready for? He asked, confused. It's a little surprise. Some friends and I wanted to welcome you home and celebrate. Why don't you come over so we can start the party? Sure. Where are you? She gave him an address and he jotted it down. Is it a club or a restaurant or something? An old friend of mine has a private club at his house. We thought it'd be a fun place for a welcome home, an anniversary party. That sounds great, Eric said, though he felt a bit uneasy. Maria laughed softly. It'll be a blast, I promise. Just wear something casual, okay? All right, see you soon. See you, babe, she said before hanging up. Eric found it odd that she didn't say she loved him, especially since this was supposed to be a special surprise. Something about her tone made him uneasy. He went upstairs, took a shower, shaved, and dressed in blue jeans and a polo shirt. When he looked up the address on Google Maps, he saw it was in a rough part of town. Who could she know living there? He knew most of her colleagues from the insurance office and doubted any of them lived in that area. Maybe it was someone from her past when she used to hang out with a tougher crowd. He locked up the house, got in his car, and set the GPS for the address. When he arrived, he was taken aback by the sight. The house, surrounded by a chain-link fence, was in the middle of a lot filled with pickups and motorcycles. None of the vehicles were familiar. Feeling a bit apprehensive, he parked and walked to the front door. A large man in a t-shirt and jeans opened the door, holding a beer with rap music blaring from inside. Yeah? The man asked. I'm Eric Goodman. My wife Maria asked me to meet her here. Do I have the right address? The man smiled, though it didn't seem entirely friendly. You must be Maria's husband. I'm Charles. We've been expecting you. Come on in. Eric walked in and saw several other large men in the room. Hey everyone, the man of the hour is here, Charles announced. The other men nodded and smiled at Eric, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Where's Mariah? Eric asked. Oh, she's downstairs getting ready for the main event, Charles said, making the others chuckle. Want a beer? Charles offered. Yeah, sure, Eric said. One of the men handed him a cold beer. Thanks, he said, taking a tentative sip. So, what's the main event? Eric asked Charles. That's the surprise. Your wife wanted to do something special for your anniversary and asked us to help. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here. Who are you guys? Charles pointed around the room. That's Peter. Over there's Owen. And next to him is Stephen. And the big guy in the back. We call him Bigman. You can see why. Eric noticed the very large, muscular man standing by the kitchen table. All of them looked tough, and Eric saw a large knife sheathed on Owen's hip. And you're all friends of Maria's? Yep, Peter said. Been friends for a while. Eric's unease grew. He took another sip of his beer, wondering what exactly he had walked into. Eric felt a jolt of unease as he looked around the unfamiliar room. Haven't seen her much since she married you, Peter said. She never mentioned any of you to me before, Eric replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Peter shrugged. I'm not surprised. People usually try to avoid us. Eric glanced around. And you have a private club here? Yeah, Charles said, down in the basement. We built it ourselves. We like to get together, have some drinks, and bring in some entertainment. The others chuckled, but Eric felt a chill run down his spine. Something felt off, and his instincts screamed at him that trouble was brewing. Just then, footsteps echoed from the basement. Is she ready? A sixth man asked as he entered the room. Is this her husband? Yeah, Charles answered. Eric, this is John. They'll take you downstairs. What's going to happen? Eric asked, his anxiety spiking. It's a little surprise. I promise it'll be an evening you won't forget, Charles said with a grin that made Eric's stomach knot. The others laughed, but Eric's nerves were on high alert. It'll be all right. Come on, Maria's waiting for you, John said, guiding Eric toward the basement stairs. Happy anniversary, Charles called out as Eric began his descent. When he reached the basement, Eric saw a small bar in one corner and a well-lit stage area at the far end. A curtain hung across the stage, and a bed sat in the middle, flanked by a camera on a tripod. Neon beer signs adorned the walls, casting a dim, bar-like glow over the room. A jukebox in one corner provided the music, and a pool table occupied the opposite end of the basement. Two men stood by, watching Eric intently. "Have a seat," John said, pointing to a chair in front of the stage. "Where's Mariah?" Eric asked, his voice betraying his unease. "She'll be out shortly. Go on, sit down. You can put your beer on the table if you want." Eric set his beer down, a sense of dread setting over him. He knew he needed to leave, but the thought of Maria kept him rooted to the spot. If he bolted, what would they do to her? He took a deep breath, sat down, and almost immediately, John and the other men grabbed his arms, zip-tying them to the chair. "What the hell is going on?" Eric shouted, anger and fear mixing in his voice. They ignored him, securing his ankles to the chair as well. "Get me out of here right now," he demanded. "Shut up, a hole," he heard a familiar voice say. He looked up to see Maria, dressed provocatively in a tiny thong and a half-bra. "What the hell is this?" Eric demanded. "Why are you dressed like that? Who are these guys?" "This is our anniversary celebration," she spat. "These are my friends, and they're going to help me teach you a lesson about cheating." She threw a photo onto his lap. It was a picture of him having dinner with his sister. "I've never cheated on you. You've got it all wrong," Eric screamed, but before he could say more, one of the men punched him in the face. Stars exploded in his vision as pain shot through him. "Stop it," Maria ordered, and the man backed off. "He'll be the one to teach you a lesson," she said, turning back to her husband. "Maria, stop this right now, and we can talk. It's not what it looks like." "Oh really?" she mocked. "It looks like you're having a great time with that blonde floozy. If you can have fun, so can I, but unlike you, I won't keep it a secret." With that, she stepped onto the stage. "Okay, boys, it's showtime." Eric tried to protest, but one of the men shoved a ball gag into his mouth, silencing him. He struggled, but it was no use. The men upstairs had now joined them, and Charles stood beside Eric, whispering in his ear. "Nothing personal, but Murray is an old friend. We're just helping her out. Sit back and enjoy the show. Don't try to be a hero. Once it's over, we'll let you go. Maybe she'll leave with you, but that's up to her." Eric tried to say something, but the gag muffled his words. "Just relax," Charles said, stepping back and nodding at Peter, who stood by the jukebox. Peter pressed a button, and a song began to play. As the music kicked in, Maria began dancing provocatively, her movements slow and deliberate. She kicked off her shoes and gradually removed her remaining clothes, twirling and gyrating with a mix of confidence and malice. "You like this, lover boy?" she taunted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Did your little blonde do this for you?" She laughed as she flung her tiny thong at Eric. "I hope you enjoy this, because you're never touching me again." She turned to the men gathered around her. "Come on, boys, show Eric how a real man treats a woman." The men, except for Owen, eagerly closed in around her. Maria knelt down as Eric struggled against his restraints, trying to scream through the ball gag. Owen stood beside Eric's chair, his arms crossed, clearly there to keep him in check. Maria rose and led the men to the bed on the stage. She sat down on it and fixed her gaze on Eric. "This will teach you to cheat on me, you jerk," she sneered. She laid back, and two men positioned themselves beside her head. Charles glanced back at Eric with a smirk. "Nothing personal, but Murray is the best I've ever had," Charles said with a chuckle. "Ready, baby?" "Yeah, Charles. Now take me and make my husband watch," Maria said, her voice laced with venom. Charles laughed and began to have sex with her. Eric, though repulsed, tried to use his breathing exercises to stay calm. The sight of Maria and the scene unfolding before him made him feel sick to his stomach. He thought to himself that she was right. He'd never touch her again. The humiliation seemed endless. When Maria got on her knees, Eric hoped it was over, but she only laughed. "Don't worry, honey," she said sarcastically. "We're just getting started, right, boys?" The men laughed along with her, and Eric's anxiety grew. Owen, still standing by Eric's chair, was not participating. Eric wondered why, but Owen's next move made it clear. He looked down at Eric with a scowl and grabbed Eric's head, forcing him to watch the stage. "Watch them, not me," he growled. As Maria continued her degrading performance, she smacked at Eric. "You want to see just how nasty I can be? I'll probably get pregnant tonight," she said. "No one used protection, and I've been off my pills for weeks. Don't worry, I used a diaphragm when we were together, so the baby won't be yours. But you'll raise this child, and if you refuse, I'll ruin you. I'll take everything you have, make you a social pariah, and brand you as a domestic abuser and a cuck." Eric's face flushed with rage. "You're probably wondering why Owen hasn't joined in, huh?" Maria continued. "Owen prefers men over women, and after tonight so will you." The men laughed, and Eric's fury reached a boiling point. He looked at Owen, who had unzipped his jeans. "I promise you'll love it," Owen said. At that moment, Eric lost control. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him, and he sprang into action. Before he knew it, he was standing amidst a chaotic scene of moaning bodies. Owen was on the ground, screaming in agony with a knife lodged in his left hand. Eric's own arms and legs were cut and bleeding from where the zip ties had held him. Maria stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. "Please don't hurt me," she begged. "Neither scared," Eric growled, his voice cold and seething with anger. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. But you will feel my wrath. I'll make sure the pain you've inflicted on me tonight comes back to you tenfold." Keeping his gaze locked on Maria, Eric pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he finished the call, he looked at her with contempt. "You foolish woman. I've got you dead to rights. You cheated on me with that blonde." "I was just getting even with you," Maria stammered. "So you hired a private detective to follow me in Seattle, right?" Eric asked. "Yes, I got that photo," she replied nervously. "Did you read the report that came with it?" Eric demanded. Maria shook her head. "No, I only looked at the photo." "That was my sister, you ignorant woman!" Eric yelled. "The last time we saw her was at our wedding. She's a senior at the University of Washington. She came to Seattle to visit me, and we had dinner. That's all it was, just dinner." Maria's face fell as the reality of her mistake sank in. "You saw the picture and jumped to conclusions without even asking me about it," Eric said, his voice cold and steady. "You just made another assumption, like you always do. Well, guess what? You're right about one thing. I'm never touching you again. I'm going to see you in jail, and then I'm divorcing you. You've pulled the final straw. We're finished." Maria stepped closer, her voice trembling with desperation. "No, Eric, please don't do this." "Trust me, Maria," Eric replied sharply. "You have no idea what I want to do right now. For your own safety, stay away from me." "Eric, please," she pleaded. "I made a mistake, that's all." "Yeah, you made a colossal mistake," Eric said with steely determination. "And now I'm going to make sure you pay for it. You played your part, Maria. Starting today, you'll find out what happens when you make a huge mistake." Just then, the police arrived. Officers stormed downstairs after smashing through the front door, guns drawn as they surveyed the scene of chaos. They moved quickly through the basement, checking on the men scattered around. One officer carefully removed the knife from Owen's hand, watching as he slumped to the floor. A sergeant approached Eric, his face pale. "Did you do all this?" he asked, his voice shaking. Eric nodded. "Why?" a sergeant asked, puzzled. "Look at the video," Eric said, pointing to the camera. "It'll explain everything." The sergeant signaled one of his officers to review the footage. After a brief look, the officer returned and updated the sergeant. The sergeant then came back to Eric. "Okay, it looks like self-defense, but I'll need a full statement from you. Also, you should get checked out." Meanwhile, ambulances arrived and paramedics began transporting the injured men upstairs on stretchers. A detective in plainclothes joined the scene, examining the room and speaking with the officers. After reviewing the video, he approached the sergeant and Eric. "I'm Detective Matthews," he introduced himself. "You must be Mr. Goodman." "Yes, that's me," Eric confirmed. "I've watched the video," Matthews said. "It appears you acted in self-defense. Can you tell me what happened?" Eric recounted the events of the evening. The detective took detailed notes. "How did you manage to escape from the chair?" Matthews asked. "And how did you take down these men? They're all much bigger than you." "I have a medical condition," Eric explained. "It's a rare syndrome I've had since I was a child. My adrenaline spikes under extreme stress, and I essentially lose control. I have medication to manage it, and my martial arts training helps keep me grounded. This is only the second time in my life something like this has happened." "Do you have that medication with you?" Matthews inquired. Eric nodded. "I carry it with me at all times, though I use it sparingly." Matthews asked an officer to bring a bottle of water. "Maybe you should take a pill now," Matthews suggested, handing the water to Eric. Eric took the small packet from his pocket and swallowed a pill with the water. He felt a noticeable calm settle over him. "Are you feeling better now?" Matthews asked. "Yes, thanks," Eric replied. "Do you remember everything that happened?" Matthews asked. "No, I don't," Eric admitted, shaking his head. Matthews showed Eric the video. Eric watched in shock as he saw himself breaking out of the chair, grabbing Owen's knife, and pinning it into Owen's hand. The video played out like a high-octane action film, with Eric taking down the other men swiftly. "You don't remember any of this?" Matthews asked. "No," Eric said. "Honestly, I didn't think I had it in me to do something like this." "What's the last thing you remember?" Matthews pressed. "That man preparing to force me to perform oral sex," Eric said, tears streaming down his face. "So you're saying he was going to rape you, and your wife was complicit?" Matthews asked. Eric nodded. "Yes, that's what was about to happen. And my wife was in on it." "I understand," Matthews said, glancing over at Maria, who was giving her statement to another officer. "Mr. Goodman, I need you to go to the hospital and get checked out," Detective Matthews said, his tone firm yet understanding. "We'll need to talk more after I've gathered all the evidence. I assume you're planning to press charges." "Absolutely," Eric replied. "And what about your wife?" Matthews asked. "Do you want to press charges against her as well?" "Especially against her," Eric said with bitterness. "She's the one who orchestrated all this." "Understood," Matthews said, taking down Eric's contact information, while a paramedic examined his wrists and ankles. "I'll be in touch. Please try not to leave town." "I'm not going anywhere," Eric assured him. Matthews nodded and gave instructions to the officers before heading over to where Maria was still being questioned. A few minutes later, Eric heard her frantic cries as she was cuffed and led out of the room. "Please, Eric, don't let them take me away," Maria wailed. "Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." Eric turned his head, unable to look at her. After everyone had finished with their statements, he drove to the hospital for an examination. A few hours later, with his injuries cleaned and bandaged, he made his way home. On the drive, he realized he hadn't eaten since leaving Seattle, so he swung through a drive-thru for a burger. Once home, he ate and then called his boss, George Baldwin, to explain the situation. "Dan and Eric, I'm really sorry to hear that," George said sympathetically. "Why don't you bring by the signed contract and then take the week off? You've got plenty of vacation time saved up." "Thanks, George. I appreciate that," Eric replied. After calming down, Eric took a long shower and went to bed. The next morning, he went to the jewelry store and cancelled the order for Maria's necklace. He paid a small restocking fee but got most of his money back. He also cancelled the hotel reservation and had the charges reversed. Then he scheduled a meeting with Linda Blair, an attorney, for Friday to discuss the divorce. Just as he finished lunch, his phone rang. Seeing it was Maria's parents, he took a deep breath and answered. "Hello. Eric, what on earth is going on?" Betty, his mother-in-law, demanded. "Maria called from the county jail. She said she's been arrested and they're holding her without bail. Did you do something?" Eric struggled to maintain his composure. He counted to 10 and took a few deep breaths before responding. "Did she tell you why she was arrested?" "She said it was all a misunderstanding on your part," Betty said. "On my part, really?" Eric's voice hardened. "She didn't tell you that she planned to have me tied up, forced to watch her have sex with multiple men, and then was going to have me sexually assaulted by one of her friends?" "What? Why would she do such a thing?" Betty asked, clearly shocked. "Because she saw a photo of me having dinner with my younger sister and thought I was having an affair," Eric said with frustration. "The woman is crazy. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with an attorney to file for divorce." "You can't be serious," Betty said, her voice filled with disbelief. "I know you're upset, but surely you can understand how she might feel." "What would you do if you saw a picture of her having lunch with another man?" "I'd ask her about it," Eric replied. "I wouldn't go off the deep end like she did. Look, Betty, you have no idea what your daughter has done. I can't just overlook it. I'm done with her jealousy and manipulation. It ends now. And let me ask you this. If the roles were reversed, and I had tied her up, forced her to watch me with other women, and then had her assaulted by one of them, would you still want her to stay with me?" Betty had no response. "Don't be a hypocrite, Betty," Eric said firmly. "You know what I'm doing is right." With that, he ended the call. When she called back, he sent it straight to voicemail. Curious, Eric went to the second bedroom where he and Maria had their computers set up. He sat down at her computer and logged in easily, knowing her passwords. He opened her email client and was stunned by what he found. There was an email from Jenkins Investigations with an attached document and photo. The photo was the same one Maria had thrown in his face earlier. The document detailed that Eric Goodman, meaning him, had dined with a younger woman. The report also mentioned that after dinner, the woman left and Eric went to his room. The details were unsettling. The report was clear. The woman in the photo was Dorothy Goodman, Eric's youngest sister and a senior at the University of Washington in Olympia. According to the report, there was no evidence of any illicit behavior between Eric and Dorothy. Throughout the surveillance, Eric had behaved appropriately, with no signs of misconduct. The report concluded that if Maria had bothered to read it, she would have known he was innocent of any infidelity. Instead, she had jumped to conclusions based solely on the photograph. Eric printed out the report and continued his investigation. He discovered emails between Maria and Owen in which Maria accused Eric of cheating and sought revenge. Owen had responded with details about a website where Maria could enact her vengeance. As Eric read through these emails, his anger boiled over. It became clear that the whole ordeal was meticulously planned. Maria had orchestrated his assault, the videotaping of the incident, and the publication of the video online. Eric printed out the incriminating emails and examined Maria's browser history. He found multiple visits to websites similar to the one Owen had recommended. The sites showcased videos where men, presumably husbands, were bound and forced to watch their wives have sex with other men. The final humiliation involved these husbands being coerced into interactions with Owen. Eric recognized several men from the videos: Charles, Peter, Owen, Stephen, Bigman, and others whose names he didn't know. These men were clearly affiliated with the website. What shocked him further was that the videos were accessible to anyone willing to pay a premium. Eric knew that for such content to be published, there needed to be a release form granting permission. He had never signed such a form and wondered if the other men had. He picked up his phone and called Detective Matthews. "Matthews," the detective answered. "Detective, this is Eric Goodman. I have some information that might interest you." Can you come over to my house? Sure, let me wrap up what I'm doing, and I'll be right over. Thanks, Eric said before hanging up. While he waited for Matthews, he searched for the website's owner. The registration details were private, but he knew that law enforcement could issue a subpoena to obtain this information. He also noted which company hosted the site and printed that out for Matthews. About half an hour later, Matthews arrived and rang the doorbell. Thanks for coming, Detective, Eric said as he opened the door. You have something for me? Matthews asked. Yes, it's in my computer room, Eric replied. Matthews followed Eric upstairs and reviewed the printouts. This supports what we found at the scene. From what we've seen, this has happened to multiple men. What about release forms? Eric asked. We found forms signed by the wives. Your wife signed one too. We're still going through all the evidence though. So she knew the video would be posted online? Eric inquired. Looks that way, Matthews confirmed. As for the husbands, I don't recall seeing any forms for them, but we're still reviewing everything. I'd like to keep these printouts for my attorney, Eric said. The files are still in her email. Matthews thought for a moment before nodding. Sure, but don't destroy them. After Matthews left with Maria's computer, Eric sat down at his own machine and had an idea. He searched video sites and found several lengthy videos produced by the same site. In each video, the husbands were treated similarly to how he had been, while their wives engaged with other men, excluding Owen. Each video ended with Owen having sex with the husbands. Eric revisited the email thread he had printed from Maria's computer and read it again carefully. It was all laid out clearly. Owen had written, "Just so you know, we usually end the session with some sex involving the husband. Are you okay with that?" "Oh, definitely," Maria had responded. "How far does it go?" "As far as you want, as long as your husband agrees to it," Owen had replied. "I'd love to see him being had," Maria had written. "Can you do that?" "Sure," Owen had said, "but he has to agree." "Don't worry about that. It'll make him agree," Maria had assured. Eric's blood pressure was on the rise as he stepped away from the computer, struggling to steady his breathing. Since deep breaths weren't helping, he popped another pill and headed downstairs, needing a break from the shocking discoveries. The next day, he met with Linda to discuss the divorce. He brought copies of Maria's emails, one set for Linda and another for Maria's parents. Arriving at Linda's office a bit early, he was promptly shown in. After introductions, Eric laid out his story and handed over the emails between Maria and Owen. Linda listened intently, taking notes as Eric spoke. After reviewing the email thread, Linda shook her head in disbelief. "You know, I've seen a lot of cases, but this one is something else. Fortunately, in this state, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery, cruelty, and abuse. This situation seems to cover all three." Eric confirmed, yes, she's been arrested and is being held without bail. Linda turned to her computer and after a few moments nodded. "I see she was arraigned yesterday with a slew of charges: spousal abuse, sexual assault, conspiracy to commit assault, fraud, and illegal imprisonment. The judge must have considered her a serious threat. Her accomplices are facing similar charges. And you mentioned these men run a website that profits from these videos." "Yes," Eric said. "I found several of their videos, and they're all quite similar." Linda asked, "Did they inform you about this before they tied you up?" "No," Eric replied. "They made it seem like some sort of anniversary party or surprise. They never mentioned anything about sex or selling videos online." Linda's expression hardened. "Well, we definitely have a strong case against your wife and the men involved, as well as the site's hosting provider." She continued typing and making notes. "Do you know if your wife was offered any royalties for the video?" "No, I haven't seen anything like that," Eric said. Linda frowned. "The website seems to attract a lot of traffic. They're probably making a fortune from this." "Here's the plan," she said, shifting her focus back to Eric. "I'll draft the divorce papers asking for 85% of everything. We'll also request the house and any other assets we can claim. The judge might not grant everything, but it's a starting point. We can use this email thread and her being held without bail as leverage. If she's released, we'll secure a restraining order against her and her accomplices. But I don't think you need to worry too much about that. Eric nodded, relieved. You mentioned Detective Matthews has the video as evidence, and it hasn't been leaked online, Linda asked. He has it, Eric confirmed. As far as I know, it hasn't been posted. Linda noted this. Good. I'll coordinate with him about the video. Also, if you're interested, I can file a civil claim against the website owners and the hosting provider. Yes, please do, Eric said. Linda looked at him sympathetically. Do yourself a favor and stay away from your wife. Don't dwell on what she's done. Let me and the authorities handle it. Based on what you've told me, it's best to distance yourself from her entirely. If you'd like, I can arrange for a therapist to help you through this. Eric nodded, grateful. I've tried everything I can think of, but it's not enough. The breathing exercises and medication usually help, but this situation is overwhelming. Linda handed him a card. I'll call the therapist right now if you'd like. Yes, please, Eric said. Linda made the call and set up an appointment. After finishing, she smiled at Eric. Dr. Dalton can see you this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Will that work for you? Eric glanced at his watch and nodded. That works. Thanks, Linda. Good, she said, offering a reassuring smile. Linda handed Eric a sheet of paper with a list of tasks that needed urgent attention. Most of the items related to banking, so Eric decided to tackle those after his appointment with her. I'll handle this right away, he said. Great, Linda replied. I know this has been a tough time for you, so make sure you take some time to rest and let us manage things for now. Got it? I do, Eric said. Don't worry, Eric, Linda assured him. This will all sort itself out, and you'll be able to move forward with your life. He thanked her and left, leaving a substantial retainer behind. Next, he headed to the bank, where he closed their joint credit cards, withdrew nearly everything from their account except for $10, and opened a new account in his name only. He also applied for a new credit card. Afterward, he went to Maria's parents' house to explain everything that had happened. He showed them the email chain between Maria and Erwin, and they were visibly shocked by the revelations. This is appalling, Betty said, shaking her head. I can't believe she would do something like this. Are you sure you didn't cheat on her? Betty, I love Maria deeply, and I would never cheat on her, Eric replied. She saw a picture of me having dinner with my little sister and jumped to the wrong conclusions. She didn't even bother to read the report that would have proven my innocence. If she had, none of this would have happened. Betty looked distressed. I don't know what to say, Eric. I'm truly sorry this happened. I'm sorry I married her, Eric said. Just do me a favor and stay in touch. We've always thought of you as the son we never had. I will, Betty promised. By the way, Maria's card is still at that guy's place. I can give you her keys if you want to pick it up. I'll bring her things by later today or over the weekend. Thanks, Eric said, taking the keys and giving Betty the address. He then headed to his appointment with Dr. Dalton. Dr. Abigail Dalton, known as Abby to her friends and patients, listened attentively as Eric shared his story. She didn't interrupt until he finished. I've heard of your condition, but I've never met anyone with it before, Abby said. You mentioned using martial arts training to manage it. Yes, mostly breathing exercises, along with medication to control my blood pressure, Eric explained. It usually works quickly, and I've rarely needed to use it until recently. Are you still practicing martial arts? Abby asked. Yes, Eric confirmed. Let's consider incorporating some new exercises and meditation techniques, Abby suggested. Would you be open to that? I would, Eric agreed. Good, Abby said. We've got a lot to work on, but I believe we can help you without relying on more medication. Eric left the office feeling hopeful. At home, he began packing up Maria's things, including their wedding photos and her wedding dress. He boxed up some of the trinkets she had collected over the years, items that now held no meaning for him. He wanted nothing left in the house that reminded him of her. That weekend, he changed the locks on the house, took Maria's belongings to her parents, and did his usual yard work. On Sunday, he found an app designed to help with relaxation, downloaded it, and listened to the calming sound of rain while doing breathing exercises. After about half an hour, he felt more like himself and decided to return to work the next day. The weeks that followed were quieter for Eric. His routine consisted of working, relaxing at home, and enjoying the peace that came without Maria's constant accusations. Therapy sessions with Abby were beneficial, and the relaxation techniques she recommended proved effective. Linda stayed in touch, letting Eric know she planned to wait until after Maria's trial to serve her divorce papers. Her strategy was to ensure the divorce process went smoothly if Maria was a convicted felon. When Maria's trial day arrived, Eric was called to testify, something he was eager to do. The jury was stunned by the evidence presented, including Eric's testimony. They reached guilty verdicts on all charges within a couple of hours. The judge, showing no leniency, sentenced Maria to the maximum of 25 years, with the possibility of parole in 20 years. As Maria was being led out, the process attorney's representative stepped forward, verified her identity, and handed her a manila envelope. "You've been served," he said. Defeated, Maria signed the papers and handed them back. The attorney's representative took the papers and wished Maria a good day. With tears welling up in her eyes, she glanced at Eric, who couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. The deputies led her away, guiding her towards the van that would transport her to the state women's prison. The trials for Charles and his accomplices dragged on for quite some time. Detective Matthews uncovered a shocking amount of evidence revealing that they had exploited up to 13 men over the past 2 years. They discovered what seemed to be consent forms signed by the victims, but the men claimed these were signed under pressure and after the fact. To make matters worse, the website had also shared the personal information of these men. At least 2 of the victims had taken their own lives as a result of the harassment. The women involved in these revenge schemes received 15-year sentences, while the men got 30 years each. The website was shut down, and thanks to Linda's legal team, all the victims who could be located received substantial financial compensation, which led to the bankruptcy of Charles and his associates. The hosting providers also settled, adding to the compensation pool. When Linda handed Eric a check for $2 million, he was overwhelmed. Although the restitution was significant, it did little to mend his shattered heart. "You're a good man, Eric Goodman," Linda said, offering a comforting smile. "There are many wonderful women out there who would love to be with you. You'll find someone." "Thanks, Linda." "Maybe one day," Eric replied, his voice tinged with hope and sadness. Eric continued his therapy sessions with Abigail, who helped him navigate his emotional turmoil. Over the next 2 years, he immersed himself in work and dated occasionally, though only in the last few months had he found himself seeing the same woman more than once. Abigail noted in her records, "He has a lot of issues to work through, but on the positive side, he hasn't had any more episodes and seems to be moving forward. I believe he'll be okay in the long run. At least I hope so." A few days later, Eric met a man at a local bar. Their conversation was brief, lasting no more than 15 minutes. Eric walked to his car and waited. The man approached, picked up a small briefcase Eric had placed on the ground, and with a nod of acknowledgement, they parted ways. 5 days later, Linda informed Eric that Maria had become pregnant from her actions that fateful night, but suffered a miscarriage after being attacked by 3 large women in a bathroom. She was now heavily bleeding and hospitalized. Linda also mentioned that Maria would never be able to conceive again. Eric thought bitterly, people like her should never have children. 10 days later, chaos erupted in the prison during lunch hours, resulting in the deaths of Charles and Peter. 3 days after that, Stephen was found hanging in his cell. 5 days later, John was shot by prison guards while attempting to scale the prison wall with 2 other inmates. The other 2 prisoners were unharmed. Bigman and 2 others died under mysterious circumstances, with autopsies revealing poison as the cause. Owen, however, seemed to have a stroke of luck. He managed to escape the prison with 2 other inmates and cross the border into Mexico. Little did Owen know his escape wasn't quite what he thought. His accomplices took him to Nogales, where he met a beautiful woman at a local diner. They danced, and she invited him to her home. Owen, grinning with anticipation, followed her to her bedroom. But as soon as he entered, darkness engulfed him after a sudden blow to the head. When Owen regained consciousness, he found himself tied to a chair. A man in a yellow raincoat and gas mask appeared, holding a phone in front of him. "Hello, Owen. I hope you remember me," the man said with a chilling calmness. "I asked my friend to be gentle with you and stretch out the night, just like you once told me. I promise you'll love it." Owen tried to scream, but his mouth was gagged. A moment later, the room was filled with the roaring sound of a chainsaw. The masked man stepped closer, holding the chainsaw in his hand, and asked, "Do you like this, my lusty friend?" The room was filled with an unsettling tension, and Owen's terror was palpable as the chainsaw's roar grew louder. I look forward to your comments on this story.